You won't believe what they did to keep her silent and what the church tried to hide. The voice she left behind told the whole story. She was pregnant, he was her pastor, and she vanished after one final church visit. 6 days later, her body surfaced. So did a voice memo. So did a whisper that the court was never meant to hear. Angela Monroe was last seen on Wednesday, October 12th. The night began like many others in Cedar Ridge, Georgia, a town known for its peaceful streets, family-owned businesses, and a church that stood at its heart like a monument to tradition. That church was New Grace Chapel. At 6:42 p.m., Angela pulled into the church lot and parked her black 2013 Ford Escape. She was dressed simply, carrying her Bible, and waved politely to one of the ushers as she entered. She had arrived alone. Midweek prayer service began at 7:00 p.m. and ended at approximately 8:40 p.m. According to several church members, Angela stayed behind as most people began to exit. She was seen speaking with a few women from the prayer circle before quietly walking toward the front of the sanctuary, where she requested to see Pastor Jerry Fields in private. Calvin Brooks, one of the longtime ushers, later told investigators that Angela looked tired but calm. He also noted that Pastor Jerry appeared reluctant when she approached him, but eventually agreed to meet in his office. The two walked into his study around 8:50 p.m. No one else followed. That office was located behind the altar, in a hallway accessible only through the pulpit doors or the rear staff corridor. According to church custodian Natalie Drew, who had stayed late to mop the floors in the fellowship hall, the lights in Pastor Jerry's office remained on until approximately 9:25 p.m., at which point the hallway went dark. Natalie didn't see Angela leave. At 9:45 p.m., another church member, Brian Walker, drove past the chapel and noticed that the main church lights had been turned off, but the security floodlight above the rear exit had just come on. He didn't think much of it at the time, but later described it as unusual. That floodlight is motion-activated and rarely used. Angela never returned home that night. By 10:12 p.m., her mother, Shirley Monroe, began calling her phone. The first 2 calls rang without answer. The third went straight to voicemail. Shirley sent a text message asking if everything was okay. It was never read. Angela's son, Elijah, had been staying with Shirley that evening, as he often did on prayer nights. When Angela failed to return home by 11 p.m., Shirley grew concerned, but tried not to panic. She assumed her daughter might be caught in a conversation or had stopped somewhere along the way. By morning, Shirley drove to Angela's apartment. Her car was not in the driveway. Her lights were off. Her front door was locked. Shirley let herself in using a spare key. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. Angela's bed was untouched. Her Bible was not on the nightstand. Her purse was missing. There was no note. At 6:25 a.m., Shirley filed a missing persons report with the Cedar Ridge Police Department. Shortly after 9 a.m., Angela's vehicle was located. It was parked in the back section of the Cedar Ridge Walmart parking lot near the rear loading bay, where delivery trucks often turn around. The SUV was locked. Her purse was inside on the passenger seat. Her car keys were still in the ignition. A nearly full bottle of water rested in the center console. Angela's phone was not in the car. Surveillance footage retrieved from Walmart's parking lot cameras showed the SUV pulling into the space at 10:18 p.m. The angle of the camera did not show who exited the vehicle, if anyone did. More notably, just before Angela's SUV pulled in, a second vehicle, a dark sedan, appeared in the adjacent space. That vehicle's license plate had been removed. It remained parked for 8 minutes before pulling away. That sedan has not been identified to this day. There were no obvious signs of struggle inside Angela's car. However, a forensic technician later recovered 2 partial fingerprints from the rear passenger window. One of those prints matched Angela. The other print matched a woman named Kendra Holmes. a former church office secretary who had resigned from New Grace Chapel just 5 weeks earlier, citing a personal conflict with the leadership. Kendra has refused to speak publicly and declined multiple interview requests from police. Meanwhile, Pastor Jerry Fields was informed of Angela's disappearance that same morning. When asked by investigators whether he had spoken with her after church, he confirmed that she had requested to speak with him privately, but claimed that their meeting was brief. He stated that Angela left the church shortly before 9:30 p.m. and that he had assumed she went home. Pastor Jerry did not participate in the search efforts. Over the next 5 days, law enforcement, GBI agents, and over 60 community volunteers scoured wooded areas, creeks, abandoned buildings, and gas station dumpsters. Prayer vigils were held on the church lawn. Flyers were stapled to telephone poles. It was during one of these search sessions that a volunteer, Carol Jeffers, mentioned something that began to shift opinion. She asked why neither Pastor Jerry nor Camille Fields had joined the search. Camille, who had once led the women's ministry and regularly organized outreach programs, had not attended a single vigil. Several members who called her said their messages were not returned. When asked, church staff said only that Camille had not been feeling well. On the 6th day after Angela's disappearance, at approximately 7:35 a.m., a fisherman named Warren Fuller contacted authorities. He had discovered a floating body near the shallow banks of Willow Creek Lake. Law enforcement and rescue personnel responded immediately. The body was recovered and later identified through dental records and clothing description as Angela Monroe. She was clothed, but her blouse was torn. Her feet were bare. Bruises were visible on her wrists and upper neck. 2 fingernails were broken. She had a scrape across her right cheek and swelling to the back of her head. The GBI autopsy determined that Angela had died from manual strangulation. Toxicology reports showed no alcohol or drug use. There were signs of restraint. The most significant detail in the coroner's report was the confirmation that Angela had been approximately 8 weeks pregnant. Angela had not disclosed this pregnancy to her mother, her friends, or her co-workers. There were no records of recent prenatal visits, nor any notes in her apartment that mentioned the pregnancy. Her family was blindsided. Her death, already tragic, took on an entirely new level of weight. Now, 2 lives had been lost. The town of Cedar Ridge was stunned. For days, the community moved in silence. The local high school held a moment of remembrance. Business owners placed black ribbons in their windows. The weekly town bulletin printed Angela's name on the front page, beside a single candle. Angela's funeral was held at New Grace Chapel on Saturday, October 22nd. Every seat inside the sanctuary was filled. Extra chairs were brought in. Outside, dozens more stood quietly in the parking lot, holding candles and printed photographs of Angela. Her 10-year-old son, Endrick, sat beside his grandmother, dressed in a small black suit, holding a framed picture of himself and his mother. Service was led by Pastor Jerry Fields. He stood behind the pulpit, dressed in a dark suit and clerical collar, flanked by 2 church elders and his wife Camille. With a somber voice and minimal expression, he addressed the congregation. Angela was a daughter of this church, he said. She was a faithful servant, a kind mother, and a devoted believer. Though we may never understand this loss, we trust in God's plan and pray that justice will come. His words were followed by silence. Camille Fields stood a step behind him, expressionless. She did not speak. She did not join the final prayer. She exited through the side door and did not attend the burial. That evening, a former church member named Denise Lane posted publicly on Facebook. She wrote that Angela had confided in her just 2 weeks earlier, saying she felt unsafe and unsure of whom to trust. That post was later deleted. One day after the funeral, Shirley Monroe received An anonymous message through her front door mail slot. It contained only one sentence. She knew too much. The investigation into Angela's death continued, but one thing was clear. Angela Monroe disappeared after leaving the church. Her car was found with the keys still in the ignition. Her body was discovered in a lake nearly a week later, showing signs of strangulation. She had been pregnant. The town of Cedar Ridge was left shaken, and the man who had baptized her, counseled her, and prayed over her coffin, with his wife standing silently behind him, had declared her a daughter of this church. What had happened in that office the night Angela stayed behind, and who had gone through so much effort to make sure she never spoke again? Those answers were coming, but first, the town would have to accept that the truth wasn't waiting outside their church. It was waiting inside it. The discovery of Angela's body did not bring closure. It brought more questions. While the town of Cedar Ridge mourned her death, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation intensified its involvement. Angela had been a well-respected member of the community. She had no criminal record, no known conflicts, and no documented mental health issues. She had also been 8 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. The murder of a pregnant woman in a small southern town was not something easily ignored. Investigators understood immediately that this case would require discretion, persistence, and careful attention to detail. The first breakthrough came from Angela's apartment. Her cell phone had not been recovered, but she had recently upgraded to a new cloud-based backup service. Detectives retrieved a warrant and requested data from the phone carrier and service provider. The recovered messages painted a picture of growing tension in Angela's life and a secret that had been weighing heavily on her. 2 messages, dated October 9th, just 3 days before her disappearance, stood out. The first read, "You can't pretend forever. I'm not going away." The second read, "You promised to leave her before the baby comes." Both messages were sent from Angela's number to a contact labeled simply as J. Based on the phone's metadata and surrounding conversations, investigators quickly confirmed that J referred to Pastor Jerry Fields. Angela and Pastor Jerry had been in regular communication for months. The tone of their messages shifted significantly in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Earlier exchanges were supportive, even affectionate. The most recent ones revealed frustration, disappointment, and emotional strain. Angela had been expecting more than silence. She had been expecting change. Further investigation into Jerry Fields' phone records showed that he had received Angela's messages, but had deleted them shortly afterward. Deleted messages were recovered by digital forensics, revealing no reply to Angela's last texts. Investigators noted a sudden stop in communication after October 10th. The evidence of a secret relationship between Pastor Jerry Fields and Angela Monroe was now undeniable. But that was only the beginning. As part of the autopsy, a forensic lab had collected samples from Angela's fingernails, which had shown signs of breakage and forceful contact. These samples were sent for DNA testing. When the results came back, they confirmed the presence of 2 separate DNA profiles beneath her nails. The primary DNA profile matched Jerry Fields. The secondary profile, however, belonged to a woman. Initially, there was no match in state or federal databases. Investigators expanded the search to residents connected to Angela, particularly individuals from New Grace Chapel. After several days of cross-referencing, the female DNA was matched to Camille Fields, Jerry's wife. This result complicated the case significantly. Camille Fields was not publicly considered a suspect at the time. She had been present at Angela's funeral. She had been seen beside her husband during press briefings. She had not spoken publicly, but her silence had, until that point, been interpreted as grief. Now investigators were forced to consider the possibility that Camille had not only known about Angela's pregnancy, but may have been directly involved in her death. When detectives attempted to speak with Camille, she was unavailable. Camille Fields had not been seen since the morning of October 19th, the day after Angela's funeral. According to her sister, who lived an hour away in Macon, Camille had called her in a state of emotional distress and asked if she could stay at her home for a few days. She refused to discuss details. For 2 days, Camille Fields remained in Macon. Her phone was switched off. She did not respond to messages from Cedar Ridge authorities. When she returned to town on October 21st, she was observed entering the church alone. One parishioner later described her as looking drained and not herself. Her hair was unkempt. Her hands were shaking. She did not attend services that Sunday. That same weekend, a neighbor of New Grace Chapel contacted police with a statement. Her name was Lorraine Jenkins. She lived across the street from the church and frequently observed the comings and goings of staff and congregation members. She reported seeing a woman who closely resembled Camille pacing outside the side entrance of the church on the night Angela vanished. According to Lorraine, the woman was barefoot and holding a phone to her ear. She walked back and forth along the sidewalk for several minutes, then stood still near the side door, staring up at the second-floor windows. Lorraine assumed it was a family dispute or something private and did not call the police at the time. The timeline she provided placed Camille at the church between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., within the estimated time of Angela's death. When confronted with this information, Camille Fields agreed to speak with investigators for the first time. Her statement, however, raised further concerns. Camille admitted that she had known about Jerry's relationship with Angela. She claimed she found out weeks earlier after reading messages on her husband's tablet. She said the discovery caused her emotional distress and that she had confronted her husband privately. Camille denied any involvement in Angela's death. She claimed that she had gone to the church the night Angela disappeared, only to confront Jerry, not knowing Angela would be there. She stated that when she arrived, she did not enter the building and left after pacing in the parking lot. When asked why her DNA was found under Angela's fingernails, Camille became visibly uncomfortable. She claimed that she and Angela had exchanged a hug during a church event a few days prior. Forensic experts determined that such a casual touch would not account for the level of contact required to embed DNA under broken fingernails during a struggle. At that point, Camille requested legal counsel. Meanwhile, church employees began speaking privately with investigators. One assistant administrator revealed that on the morning of October 13th, she had entered Pastor Jerry's office and found the carpet near the desk freshly shampooed. She had not been informed of any spill or cleaning request. A faint scent of bleach was noticeable in the room, which was otherwise rarely cleaned without notice. No request for professional cleaning had been logged in the staff maintenance records. Another staff member, who wished to remain anonymous, reported that Camille had entered the church early that same morning before anyone else arrived. She remained in the building for over 30 minutes and exited through the back door. There was no scheduled event or administrative task assigned to her that day. Detectives obtained a search warrant for the church. During their inspection, they collected samples from Jerry's office carpet, walls, and desk. Preliminary testing showed traces of human blood in a small area near the edge of the rug. DNA confirmation was pending, but the stain matched the time and place of Angela's last known location. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly beginning to form a picture. Angela had been in communication with Jerry about her pregnancy. Her final messages showed she expected him to leave Camille. She was emotionally vulnerable and growing increasingly frustrated. Pastor Jerry had failed to respond to her last pleas. Camille Fields, having discovered the affair and the pregnancy, had motive, opportunity, and now physical evidence connecting her to the scene. Angela's body showed signs of restraint and violent struggle. Her phone was still missing, and two people, one man of God and one woman of silence, held the answers that investigators were now determined to uncover. Angela Monroe's death was no longer a mystery. It was a case with suspects, with motives, and with a cover-up. As authorities prepared for a formal interrogation of Pastor Jerry Fields, whispers spread across Cedar Ridge. Some defended the pastor, others had already drawn their conclusions. The sanctuary at New Grace Chapel, once filled with prayer and praise, now sat under the shadow of suspicion. The investigation was no longer about who might be guilty. It was about how far they were willing to go to keep their secrets buried. In the days following the initial investigation, attention shifted from searching for answers to confronting what those answers might mean. The autopsy, DNA evidence, and recovered messages were enough to shake Cedar Ridge to its core. But what came next was something no one expected. The breakthrough arrived not through forensics, but through the voice of the victim herself. As part of the ongoing analysis, digital forensic teams continued to examine Angela Monroe's recovered phone. Though much of the device had been wiped, a single audio file was found buried in a password-protected application folder. The app itself was encrypted and typically used for discrete journal entries or voice memos. The audio file was dated October 9th, just 3 days before Angela's disappearance. In the recording, Angela's voice is clear, calm and deliberate. The room in which she recorded the message is quiet, but the tension in her voice is unmistakable. The message was only 12 seconds long, but it changed everything. She said, "If I end up missing, look at both of them. I'm carrying his child." That sentence was enough to confirm more than just a private relationship. It revealed fear, premeditation, and a final attempt by Angela to speak in case she never got another chance. The phrase, "look at both of them," was interpreted by investigators as a direct reference to Pastor Jerry Fields and his wife, Camille Fields. Until this point, Camille had not been publicly named as a suspect. While her DNA had been found under Angela's fingernails and her absence after the murder had raised concerns, no direct statement had placed her at the scene. That changed. With Angela's voice, investigators immediately scheduled an interview with Camille. She arrived with her attorney and declined to answer several key questions. However, when presented with the voice recording, Camille responded for the first time. She denied any involvement in Angela's death and dismissed the recording as manipulative. She stated that Angela had been obsessed with her husband and had fabricated much of their alleged relationship. According to Camille, Angela had been emotionally unstable and had developed a dangerous fixation on the church and Jerry. She claimed Angela had previously sent anonymous notes to her home, made vague threats, and even followed her once while she was shopping. No reports had ever been filed regarding these claims. When asked why she had not reported Angela's alleged behavior to police or church leadership, Camille stated that she didn't want to damage Jerry's reputation. Investigators documented her response and continued building their timeline. Then came the discovery that would shift the case entirely during door-to-door interviews around the New Grace Chapel neighborhood. A GBI investigator met a resident named Martin Bell. Mr. Bell lived in a small white cottage behind the church property, facing the alley that bordered the chapel's rear entrance. Though he had not witnessed anything on the night Angela disappeared, he mentioned that his home security cameras had been offline during a thunderstorm earlier that week. The system, which was motion-triggered, stored recordings on a local backup drive that had never been checked since the storm. Mr. Bell agreed to allow technicians to retrieve the drive. What they recovered was the most damning piece of evidence in the investigation thus far. The footage, time-stamped October 12th at 10:36 p.m., showed the rear exit of New Grace Chapel. It was a dimly lit alley, shielded from public view. At the edge of the frame, two figures are seen exiting the building and dragging what appears to be a large object wrapped in fabric toward a parked vehicle. While the resolution of the camera was low, both figures matched the build and height of Jerry and Camille Fields. One wore a long coat. The other wore what appeared to be clerical attire. The footage lasted 47 seconds before the motion ended. Investigators concluded that this video showed Angela's body being removed from the church building and transported off-site, most likely to the lake where she was later found. The clip was cross-referenced with church building access logs. The rear exit had been triggered at 10:34 p.m. and closed at 10:39 p.m. This corresponded almost exactly with the timestamps on the recovered footage. With this evidence, investigators now had a victim's voice directly naming the suspects. DNA of both Jerry and Camille on the victim. Suspicious behavior from Camille, including a 2-day disappearance. A physical video showing two people moving something from the church at the time of the crime. It was enough for a warrant. On the morning of October 24th, Camille Fields was arrested at her home and charged with obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and accessory to murder after the fact. She did not resist. She was taken into custody quietly and without incident. News of the arrest spread quickly across Cedar Ridge. Within hours, local news outlets reported that both Pastor Jerry and his wife were now officially under criminal investigation. The church issued a brief public statement. It read, "We are cooperating fully with law enforcement. We pray for truth, healing, and justice." No further comments were made. The arrest of Camille Fields marked a dramatic shift in how the town perceived the tragedy. What had initially been viewed as a private affair gone wrong now looked more like a deliberate cover-up involving both spouses. For many in the community, the involvement of Camille was harder to accept than that of her husband. She had been seen as a role model. She had organized youth programs, supported families in crisis, and spoken publicly about forgiveness and unity. Her fall from grace was swift and deeply felt. While in custody, Camille refused further interviews. Her attorney issued a statement on her behalf, denying any knowledge of or involvement in Angela's death. He stated that Camille had been manipulated, misled, and emotionally abused by her husband. He claimed that Camille had acted under pressure and had not participated in the killing itself. The legal process would determine the extent of her guilt. But for investigators, there was no doubt that she had played a role in concealing the crime. Meanwhile, Pastor Jerry remained free pending further charges. His attorneys requested time to prepare for questioning. He had not yet been formally arrested. Angela Monroe's mother, Shirley, issued a public statement. She said, "My daughter was trying to be brave. She warned us. She left us the truth. And now I pray the law does the rest." Angela's voice, recorded in fear just days before her death, had done what her living words could not. It exposed those who betrayed her, and it ensured they would not walk away in silence. Angela Monroe's murder did not begin in the shadows of Willow Creek Lake, nor in the backseat of a car parked behind a Walmart. It began a year earlier, inside a church office lined with scripture and framed photographs, a space that should have offered safety, but instead laid the foundation for betrayal. Angela had recently finalized her divorce. She was adjusting to life as a single mother, raising her 10-year-old son Elijah, while juggling work and quiet evenings alone in her modest apartment on the west end of Cedar Ridge. At first, she tried staying away from New Grace Chapel. Her marriage had ended under public scrutiny, and she feared the judgment that came with small-town whispers. But by October of the previous year, Angela began attending again. Not every Sunday, just occasionally. She kept to herself, usually sitting in the back. She would slip out just before the benediction to avoid eye contact. She was hurting, and she didn't want to be seen. Pastor Jerry Fields noticed her reappearance. Known throughout Cedar Ridge as more than just a preacher, Pastor Jerry was viewed by many as a counselor, a moral guide, and a man capable of spiritual healing. He was the kind of pastor who remembered names, prayed without asking, and made every handshake feel personal. He approached Angela after one Sunday service and asked how she was holding up. She smiled but said little. He offered to meet with her, not just for prayer, but for personal counseling. The sessions began the following week. They met inside his office every Wednesday afternoon. At first, it was structured. Angela came prepared with a notebook. They read passages from the Psalms. They discussed loneliness, forgiveness, and parenting. Sometimes the sessions lasted 30 minutes, other times nearly 2 hours. Angela would often remain afterward, sitting quietly in the sanctuary long after others had gone. In the beginning, there was no physical contact, only conversation. But emotional vulnerability has a way of blurring lines. By the 3rd month, Angela was writing more in her journal. She wrote that she felt safe in the church again. She wrote that someone finally saw her, not as a divorcee, not as a struggling mother, but as a woman worth listening to. One entry from December 3rd read, "I never expected him to understand me this way. He's kind. He listens. I know this is more than just ministry." By January, Angela was regularly staying after services, even when she was not volunteering. She would help clean up, fold church bulletins, and sometimes just wait. Witnesses later recalled seeing her speaking with Pastor Jerry in quiet corners of the sanctuary, occasionally laughing, other times appearing serious. None of it raised alarms. Yet, then came the turning point. In February, Angela began receiving private text messages from Pastor Jerry. They were spiritual at first, reminders of prayer, scripture quotes. Then more personal, then emotional, then flirtatious. He would send messages such as, "Thinking of you during this storm, you've been on my heart," and "Our sessions mean more to me than you know." Angela responded with equal vulnerability. "You give me peace. I haven't felt that in years." The affair began quietly. It was not defined, there were no declarations, but they began meeting outside church. Once at a park outside town, another time at a cafe in Monroe County, then once at a motel 40 minutes away. They used encrypted messaging apps. Angela saved his contact as David H. Pastor Jerry used prepaid gift cards to book meeting rooms. It was hidden from everyone except one person, Camille Fields. Camille had been married to Jerry for 16 years. She knew his patterns, his tone, his avoidance. She first suspected something in April, when Jerry began arriving home late from leadership meetings that did not exist. She found a receipt for an out-of-town restaurant under the church's tax ID. He told her it was for a donor meeting. Camille did not believe him. In May, she read one of his texts by accident. Jerry had forgotten to close the message preview window on his phone. The screen flashed a sentence, "Thank you for making me feel like I matter again." Angela's name was not included, but Camille already knew. Instead of confronting her husband, Camille watched. She observed his behavior. She tracked his phone through their shared account. She discovered unfamiliar addresses. She cross-checked the church's volunteer schedule and found that Angela had switched to floating roles, meaning she had no assigned duties but was still around. In June, Camille confronted Angela. The confrontation took place in the church parking lot following a Wednesday service. Angela was about to enter her car when Camille stepped in front of the driver's side door. Angela wrote about the encounter in her journal that night. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She said, "You think he'll leave me. He won't. You're not destroying what we built." Then she walked away. Camille did not threaten her physically. She did not contact the police. She made her position known and disappeared back into the background. But the warning was not forgotten. Angela continued seeing Pastor Jerry. They met discreetly, spoke in coded language, and even used shared drop points to exchange letters. When they feared texts were no longer safe. Then, in early July, Angela became pregnant. She visited a clinic outside of town. The report confirmed she was 6 weeks along. She declined all information on termination and indicated she would carry to term. She told only one person, Jerry. His response was brief. "We need to think this through carefully." Angela pushed him for a decision. She wanted clarity. She asked him to either leave the marriage or accept responsibility. He delayed. She wrote in her journal, "He says we're in this together, but I don't feel together. I feel like I'm standing alone at the edge of something awful." Camille found out about the pregnancy a week later. Angela received an anonymous letter in the mail. The envelope was typed. The letter inside said, "You've already taken too much." She suspected Camille. She told no one. Then came the second warning. On August 30th, Angela returned to her apartment and found a single sheet of paper slid under her door. The message was handwritten. It said, "End this before it ends you." Angela recorded a voice memo that same night. She said, "If anything happens to me, it wasn't a random act. It wasn't an accident. Look at both of them. I'm carrying his child." She also made a handwritten backup of the same message and placed it in an envelope labeled "In Case." That envelope was later discovered in her bedroom drawer by detectives. In the final 2 weeks before her death, Angela made repeated efforts to meet with Pastor Jerry privately. She wanted answers. She wanted an exit plan. She feared Camille was capable of more than just warnings. On October 12th, Angela stayed after service to speak with Jerry alone. She waited until the congregation had left. She was last seen entering his office at 9:02 p.m. She never came out. The church janitor returned the next morning to find the hallway carpet had already been cleaned. A stain near the baseboard had not fully dried. When asked, Pastor Jerry said he had spilled coffee the night before. That explanation was later proven false. Luminol testing revealed blood traces in the office. The DNA matched Angela Monroe. Security. Footage from a neighbor's home facing the church's rear alley later showed two figures dragging a large object toward a waiting car at 10:36 p.m. The vehicle had no plates. The shadows matched the size and movement of Jerry and Camille Fields. Angela's autopsy confirmed the cause of death. Manual strangulation. Bruising around her neck indicated a prolonged struggle. Defensive wounds on her wrists showed she had fought back. 2 sets of handprints were discovered, one matching Jerry's profile. The other, consistent with a female grip, was never officially confirmed, but forensic experts stated it was likely Camille's. Angela Monroe was killed inside. The church, the very place she went to heal, wrapped in cloth, dragged through a corridor, disposed of in a lake, and all of it was preventable. She had warned them. She had left her message. But the truth, once uncovered, revealed what Angela had feared all along. This was never about one mistake. It was about control. It was about power, and it was about a couple willing to protect their image, their marriage, and their ministry at any cost, even if it meant killing the one person who had loved him more than anyone else ever dared. They thought they buried the truth with Angela Monroe. But the courtroom told a different story. The pastor, the wife, the child no one was supposed to know about. One was charged with murder, the other with helping him cover it up. When the jury heard her voice from beyond the grave, "If I go missing, look at both of them." It was no longer just a theory, from betrayal to bloodstains, from prayer to prison. This is how it all ended. Watch the full story. The trial and aftermath. Only on Behind the Crime Scene. The courtroom in Cedar Ridge had never seen a murder trial of this magnitude. The last time the county courthouse had drawn media attention was during a zoning dispute involving a poultry plant. Before that, A property theft case that ended in a mistrial. Nothing like this. Not a double conviction trial involving a pastor, his wife, and a murdered church member pregnant with his child. The trial of Pastor Jerry Fields and his wife Camille. Fields opened to national coverage. Both were charged. Jerry was indicted on counts of first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and evidence tampering. Camille was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, and destruction of evidence. They entered court together, handcuffed but composed. They pleaded not guilty to all charges. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Linton took the lead for the prosecution. Her opening argument was firm and deliberate. She stood before the jury and said, "This was not a moment of rage. This was not a misunderstanding. This was two people who had something to lose, and a woman who refused to disappear quietly." Over 6 weeks, the prosecution laid out a timeline of secrets and choices. They presented the jury with dozens of text messages exchanged between Angela and Pastor Jerry. Some were spiritual, others emotional. Several were plainly intimate. The affair was no longer a theory. It was a fact. Then came the pregnancy. The jury heard how Angela had refused to terminate, how she had documented Camille's warnings, how she had recorded voice memos, including the now infamous final message. "If I go missing, look at both of them. I'm carrying his child." Midway through the trial, prosecutors revealed a previously undisclosed piece of evidence. An anonymous letter had been mailed to the district attorney's office 2 months prior. It contained no return address. It had been postmarked from a nearby town. Inside, a handwritten note read, "They did it together. They planned it. She brought the blanket. He brought the rope. She watched. She watched." The note referenced no names, but the envelope had been sealed with a smudge of foundation. DNA from the envelope matched Camille Fields' cousin, who was later identified and brought in for questioning. The cousin refused to testify, citing family loyalty, but the letter was entered into evidence. The handwriting was later matched to a church journal kept by Camille. The implication was chilling. Someone close to Camille had tried to anonymously confess on her behalf. The prosecution brought in forensic pathologists and crime scene experts. They showed the jury luminol photos of Jerry's office carpet. The blood traces had been scrubbed, but were still visible. A strip of baseboard trim was removed and tested. It held a small amount of dried blood that matched Angela's DNA. A second piece of evidence stunned the court. The church had an old document scanner connected to an internal drive. The file log showed a single PDF had been scanned from Camille's office printer and saved to a shared folder hours before Angela disappeared. It was titled, "Transfer of Position, Women's Ministry." It was unsigned, but suggested Camille had planned to step down publicly, possibly to avoid being tied to what was coming. It was never submitted or printed, but it was there, hidden in the system. When prosecutors played Angela's voice memo, the room was silent. "If I end up missing, look at both of them. I'm carrying his child." 2 jurors wiped away tears. A third sat stone still, arms crossed, visibly shaken. Her mother left the room. The defense objected, citing emotional manipulation. The judge overruled. The memo remained in evidence. Jerry's legal team admitted to the affair, but denied intent to kill. They claimed Angela became obsessive, manipulative, and refused to end the relationship. They painted her as emotionally unstable and claimed the pregnancy had never been confirmed to Jerry directly. They said he panicked. They denied Camille's involvement entirely. But the jury wasn't convinced. Security footage showed 2 figures leaving the church. DNA under Angela's nails matched. Camille.phone data proved Camille's presence at the scene, and one final detail sealed it. During a lunch recess on day 22 of the trial, a court stenographer overheard Camille whispering to her husband, The audio was captured faintly by the open mic system. She said, "I did this for us, don't forget that." The judge allowed the recording to be entered into the court transcript. Camille's defense team tried to block it, arguing marital privacy. It was denied. The whisper went public. It was printed across every newspaper in Georgia the next morning. On day 31, the jury returned their decision. Pastor Jerry Fields, guilty on all counts. Camille Fields, guilty on all counts. The sentencing phase lasted 2 days. Victim impact statements were read. Angela's mother stood before the court and said she begged for help. She begged for the truth to matter, and they gave her silence. Angela's son Elijah did not attend sentencing. During sentencing, Camille requested to speak. She stood, calm, no tears. She looked directly at Angela's mother and said, "Your daughter was not perfect. She knew what she was doing. I did what I had to do. I would do it again." Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge responded with only one sentence. "Then you will die behind bars with no apologies to carry you." Jerry said nothing. He never looked at the jury. He did not address the court. Both were sentenced to life, in prison without the possibility of parole. They were transported separately to high-security state facilities. Camille was placed under psychological observation for 6 weeks before being assigned to a permanent cell block. The fallout was immediate. New Grace Chapel, once the largest congregation in Cedar Ridge, announced its dissolution 3 days after sentencing. The board resigned. The building was vacated. The stained glass windows were removed. The altar was torn out. 1 month later, a contractor was hired to demolish the chapel. It was bulldozed to the ground in under 2 days. Nothing was salvaged. 6 weeks after the verdict, a quiet dedication was held at Cedar Ridge Cemetery. A new headstone was placed beside Angela's grave. It bore 2 names, Angela Monroe, 1990-2022, beloved daughter, mother, and servant of light, and beneath it, in smaller letters, Micah Monroe, unborn child of promise loved, though never held. The ceremony was private. Only 5 people were present. Among them were Angela's mother, her son, and her childhood friend, who had once sung beside her in the church choir. As the sun set over the hill, a verse was read, "He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more." Angela Monroe had been silenced in life, but in death, she had spoken louder than anyone in that courtroom ever could. If this story gripped you, remember there are more just like it, buried, silenced, and waiting to be told. Subscribe now to Behind the Crime Scene, where the truth is not just uncovered, it is exposed, because the closer you look, the darker it gets.